Hello and welcome to the Bovasin Outdoor Chronicles. My name's Jared.
And my name's Garrett.
We're two brothers who love the outdoors, and we spend most of our money and all of our free time on our adventures. From working all week
To plan all weekend.
we find ourselves surviving the week to live on the weekends.
We've definitely done that more and more. first few episodes is pretty bad.
Yeah, it's pretty smooth now.
Yeah.
I got it memorized.
But we're back, episode 6, season 2.
Episode 6.
We just had a big event for both of our lives, but mainly you. We've been talking about it for...
I got married.
Yeah. The old ball and chain's official now.
Yeah, not this last weekend, but the weekend before.
My birthday, yeah.
Yeah, it was a special day.
Yeah, it was.
You got a cake.
I did. It was pretty special.
I mean, come on.
They did.
How many people have a wedding cake and a birthday cake?
I know. It was pretty impressive.
Pretty fancy.
Thank you for doing that. Well, we're back, and today in studio we have Earl Radonski. Hopefully I'm saying your last name right. So I ran into Earl, must have been back in college days. I went out with you and one other guy on a FWP boat, electrofishing. And that was like my first experience with like electrofishing and being out on a boat on FWP. And it was an adventure. And we went on the Bighorn River, and that river's stocked with fish. So like by the end of the day, I don't think I could move. My arms were like shaking. Like, how do these guys do this for a living? But so that was like my first interaction with Earl. And then I also ran into him in my career on the Yellowstone River cleanup. And he was a boat captain. And this guy can drive a boat. I mean,
I just kept you off the rocks, didn't I? That was important.
I distinctly remember we were going down, and part of the safety thing is always have like a boat captain, but then someone to like grab the boat, like a first hand. And the first hand that was on your boat was like, we're kind of coming up against a bank, and he's like freaking out, getting ready to jump. We're like, relax, we're fine. And the boat just like, Earl was just the calmest, and he knew where the boat was going to go. So with that, go ahead and introduce yourself, Earl. Where are you at? What are your experiences? And
Well, I live in Billings, Montana now, but I grew up in Wisconsin. I moved out here in 1990 and came out hunting with my brother in 89. He already lived out here. And then I just loved the place, everything it had to offer. And I moved out here in April of 1990. First day that I moved out here, the next day I went turkey hunting. Shot a turkey on, I think it was like April 15th or 16th.
Opening day,
like opening day of turkey hunting. So that was pretty awesome. I kind of cheated though. I think I shot a 220 Swift and I shot it out of its roost. So wasn't what I do now. I love turkey hunting and calling turkeys in, and doing it with kids is great. But so moved out here in 1990. I went to school in Wisconsin for graphic arts management, came out here, and I always had just a fun in the outdoors. Always did stuff in parks in Wisconsin and fishing and as much hunting I could with brothers and friends. And when I came out here, saw the landscape and what Montana had to offer, I knew I'd be back shortly. And so, came out in October, hunted, I think at the end of October, November, and then came back in April and pretty much stayed. And then I got a job with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks doing temporary work in fisheries, and then got to meet people at FWP and got hired on in Parks Department after my little stint I had with fisheries, and worked with Parks, and then went back to fisheries in the fall, and then got hired on working as a wildlife technician, I guess. We're doing aging and check station type stuff, and going out and just observing animals, and I just got hooked. But I was already hooked on going outdoors and doing stuff in fisheries and wildlife, and so it wasn't anything new, but it was a different level than what I had in Wisconsin. So, so I stayed out and never went back. Basically, just for family functions like weddings and anniversaries and stuff like that. So, it's been great. Been out here for 34 years.
Awesome. And you said your degree was in graphic design management?
Graphic arts management was a degree that that I went into in Wisconsin, and then I actually went back to school in '99, about 2000. I went back to school and here at MSUB, and got into environmental science, and I graduated with an environmental science degree, and then I went. Did a internship with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks again. One thing I didn't get to do in fisheries when I first started there was work at the Mountain Lakes crew, and I always wanted to do that. I spent a lot of time in the mountains after I moved out here, probably about 12, 13 years before I went back and worked for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And it was just every weekend that I could, and that weather was permissible, I'd go up in the mountains and go, fishing or hiking, or usually both. And not really too much hunting, but mostly fishing and hiking, and just observing other types of nature. It's just fabulous to be out there. So
well, it sounds like somebody's at the door. I gotta go check real quick. I'll be right back. But you guys keep going.
So after I got back with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and I worked as an internship doing the mountain lakes. Then the next year when I graduated in environmental science, I got hired on with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks because they had opening in fisheries.
Okay.
And then I was with them from that point on in 2002.
So you worked for FWP for wildlife, or it wasn't fisheries, right? For a stint, like an internship, you said. And then you kind of went back to fisheries. You got then an internship doing fisheries, high mountain lakes, and then you landed a job in fisheries. So have you always been kind of driven towards that fishery side?
No, not really. I mean, I always loved fisheries. I grew up in southeast Wisconsin, so we had Lake Michigan right there, and all sorts of ponds and creeks and stuff like that. But wildlife was more of a draw. But basically what you had available to you to do in Wisconsin was hunt planted birds.
Mm-hmm.
Like rough grouse and pheasants were all planted, and the fisheries were more wild, but there was some planting, not as much as there is out here. But I got involved in wildlife mostly after I came here, and I worked with them in the at the check station, and then I got involved with doing some work, volunteer work with them, where we trapped elk with nets.
Trapped elk with nets.
Yeah,
How does that work?
So. Yeah.
You got like a big butterfly net and balls of steel.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So no, what they use is a drive tactic with a helicopter, and they have a net set up with these big long poles. They're probably like, I don't know, 16 foot tall or something like that. And they got a V notched out of them, and they prop them up on an angle like this. And they have the net that is on the other side of a hill, and they take a helicopter and they drive like 5, 6, 7 elk, and they try to get cows or the animals that they want to do the study that they're working on. Usually they're doing a study on movement or telemetry, so they take those animals and they drive them over the hill, and they don't have time to react with the net, and so they drive them into the net, and then people are hiding in the grass and the sagebrush, and they go and tackle them and stretch their legs out and put ropes around them and put black bags over their head and try to settle them down and everything, just like you see on, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. At least when I was growing up.
Yeah. What do you do for a living? I'm an elk wrangler.
Yeah. That takes a special kind of cowboy hat.
Yeah.
Exactly. So padded Carhartts and motorcycle helmets, or some kind of helmet.
Oh man, didn't get beamed.
No, nothing ever really happened when I did it, but I'm sure people got hurt a few times, you know.
I mean, they're large, powerful animals.
Oh, definitely. So yeah, I did some of that and a couple different places where FWP wanted to do telemetry studies. So they'd put radio collars on them, and they'd also put ear tags and take blood work and do all the things that, you know, wildlife managers do. But I did want to get into wildlife. The thing was something in wildlife just wasn't available in Billings, where, you know, I was located, and in fisheries there was. So I wasn't being real picky about, you know, where I wanted to work. And I love fisheries. I mean, I did a lot of fishing, you know, in the mountains when I came out here, and in the rivers, and, you know, just loved it, you know, lots of opportunities. So I did love fisheries, but, you know, over the years working with FWP for so many years and handling thousands and thousands and thousands of fish, it kind of got old, and I kind of got away with that. And the only thing that was still really, you know, like important to me was to get kids involved in fisheries. And so when I worked with FWP, I was part of a program called Hooked on Fishing, and I worked with the kids, mostly like about fifth graders, and we had other people working on in the program. There were all sorts of sessions that they went through. They went like 8 different sessions, and once a month, somebody that was either a volunteer that worked for FWP or worked for FWP went and taught them something different about water or the ecosystems that these animals live in, or fishery or fish, or you know, just different things like that. So
I mean, I think that's such a crucial thing, especially in like modern day world. You know, a kid has a cell phone at a younger and younger age, so being able to get them out and kind of hook them on this sense of adventure, I definitely think that there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and that's an impactful age is right around, you know, like 11 years old or somewhere in there. So it definitely, you know, was beneficial for everybody, for the kids, for the state, for, you know, carrying on future generations of outdoorsmen.
So what were your responsibilities for fisheries? Like what did you do? You said you handled tons of fish. Were you a fish wrangler? Did you set up nets or you know what did that all entail working for fisheries?
So, well, Garrett saw some of it, but I mean, there's a lot of different things, but we didn't do things, you know, like the traditional angler did. You know, some of the fishing that we did was traditional angling, but there were certain species that we were targeting that you had to do that type of
Electrofishing
sampling. But electrofishing was probably one of the most common ones that we used, and we used it in lakes and reservoirs, and, you know, in streams. You did like backpack shocking. You had a backpack on that created the electricity, either from batteries or from a small generator, like a small Honda generator. And there was a positive power that you put out and a negative tail that you had that created the field that attracted the fish. So and then we also did netting too. So gill netting was one of the things that we used on most of the reservoirs, and that was mainly to keep track of our stocks and what was being stocked in those reservoirs. So you could try to do different things to improve the fisheries as far as size, catch rates, and stuff like that.
So how do you tell if you caught like a stocked fish when you're out sampling? Is there a certain look to them?
You know, it's for you know, the common person to see a difference in a stocked fish to a wild fish. not really any difference. But the guys that are out there and they're doing it professionally, outfitters, they can kind of tell that, this might be a stock fish.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing might be the size. One thing might be that there's deformations in the fins, fin curl or stub fins that they get in the raceways when they're in the hatcheries. And then other ways that you can tell is, a lot of states do this, is clip the adipose fin. So that was mainly done when we're doing some kind of study on the fish. So if there was like
to see how they progressed or something.
Yeah, so if one species of fish would do better than the other, as far as size, because everybody wants to catch a big fish, right?
Right.
You don't want to go out and catch little dinky
Mhm.
fish. You want to catch poundage. So if you found out that a species or a strain of rainbow trout, certain strain of rainbow trout was doing better in a reservoir than another strain of rainbow trout, you'd stock the rainbow trout that would do better, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Makes sense.
so.
Yeah.
But for electrofishing, you said you're also doing rivers and lakes with that. How deep does that go? Is there a limit to how deep that the fish are? Do you only get certain type of fish then with that sampling method?
Yeah, so on reservoirs, and there's a big difference in every place that you go to. So the water chemistry is different. So salinity levels can be higher in other places, and calcium and different minerals that are in the water can make a difference on how the electricity actually shocks the fish.
So then you adjust your machine then.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
basically what you had in the boat for electrofishing is a generator, and then the generator produces AC power just like you have in your house, light socket, plug it in. And then what we did was we had a box that was called a rectifier box. And that rectifier box, you could change it over. You could keep it AC if you wanted to, but it's more dangerous to you as a person working, around
In the
water and
water,
fisheries. AC power is way more deadly than DC power is. And it really comes down to amps too. Amps are a big thing. If you know anything about electricity, if you have high amps, high amps is already going to kill you. But it doesn't take much. But DC power is safer for you and it's safer for the fish. So we would change that over with the rectifier box to DC if we had to, and then we would run DC, and then we'd have just starting points for most of the places that we went to, and we knew we had stuff, written down where we started, kind of a log book. And then we just made adjustments if we had to, but they were small adjustments. And basically you're shocking in about, like 4 feet of water or less in a river. Some of the places like Yellowtail, Bighorn Canyon,
Mm-hmm.
you'd shock right next to the shoreline, keeping the boat right next to the shoreline, and you could shock up to like 10 feet down.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, it just depends on the water makeup, the water chemistry, the depth of the water, the size of the fish. There's a lot of factors that go into, how effective you are in shocking fish. But a bigger fish is going to conduct more electricity. So that bigger fish is probably going to be easier to bring in or get stunned more by the electricity than a little guy that's just inches long.
Interesting.
So you
'Cause
see
Never
those
thought
little
it'd be
guys just
different.
chase off, and they get tickled and they just go running off, and be hard to get those. So,
Interesting. You would think it'd be like the inverse, like the small
Yeah.
fish would get more shock, but it makes sense. Less touching the water, less contact.
Yeah, and most of the time, smaller fish hang out in shallower water. It's safer. You got more structure and everything, and you got more places to hide. So that's where they hang out, and so they don't get eaten, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so a lot of times we get a lot of small fish in those shallower waters because it shocked them pretty well. And then the bigger fish, they're in deeper water, and they have the depth to get away, and always too was the speed was a factor. So if a big fish was there and you could see them, and the electricity would just kind of be on the edge of where he was at, and they'd just kind of tickle him, bam, they'd be gone. But if they got hit by it, then it'd be easy
They're
to bring them in.
using that up.
Yeah.
So what do they do? I didn't go. When you shock a fish, does it just like belly up and float?
What it does is the electricity causes a twitching action in the spine. So the electrode that's out there is usually like a dangler of some kind, and the positive electrode causes it gravitates towards the positive electrode by a twitching action in the spine. So it gravitates towards the positive, not the negative. In a boat, the negative was the boat, and then we had cables that went out in front of the boat and were dangling. And there's all sorts of different types of products that are out there that people made. There was a sphere that was used. We never really used them. We used cable, chains, just different types of stuff that different states used.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it was probably the most widely used type of sampling that we did, and then gill netting was probably the next most popular, and then the last one, besides angling, was hoop netting, and we got involved in sampling ling or burbot, freshwater cod on the Yellowstone River, and using hoop nets, and then we would bait these hoop nets with chunk bait inside of a bag, and the fish would go into these hoop nets and not find their way back out. They have fikes in them, and they're basically a fike is a funnel, and then there's a ring that the fish can go through, and if they try to find their way back out, they can't find that ring
to get out.
Yeah, they follow the netting, and they get stuck inside the net.
So with ling, you're using hoop nets. With electrofishing, is there a certain type of fish that it didn't really work, like bottom fish, like catfish or
Carp or anything that was a stubborn one?
I gotta think about that one. Not really. I mean, I think that the deeper the fish, the ones that hung out in the deepest part of the water, were probably the hardest ones to shock. So it didn't really matter species wise. Whitefish, they'd get usually hit pretty hard when we were on the Bighorn River. They turn belly up, and they'd bleed a little bit from the gills, and people would yell at you, "Hey, you're killing these fish." It just take a little bit. They get hit harder than other fish, and it just take a little bit longer for them to recover. But I think depth is the biggest thing when you're electrofishing, that had a factor as far as if you were getting those fish or not getting them. So fish that was more towards the surface, we had a better chance of getting than a fish that hung out on the bottom of the river or bottom of the lake.
Makes sense. And then for gill netting, is that a lethal trap then, or they get caught up in the gills, or do you release them? How does that work?
Yeah, gill netting is pretty much lethal. There were fish that we still released, but it was a small percentage. And we had two types of nets. We had floating gill nets and sinking gill nets. And then basically what you're doing there is you're sampling the fish that are using the bottom of the lake or reservoir, and then you're using the floating gill nets are targeting the fish that use the upper 6 feet of the lake or reservoir. So just different species that you're going after, and different gear you have to use to be successful trying to find out what's out there and what the population is like. And so that's what FWP did, was basically we're out there in the field sampling different species of fish and different bodies of water, and then they're using that data to basically make regulations. So if we find that, like on the Yellowstone River, if I go out and I find that the population of sauger is low over a long number of years, we go out and sample and we just don't catch many of them, then we might make a tighter regulation that says, hey, we can only keep 1 or 2 of these fish, and then possession limit maybe twice the daily limit. On the other hand, if you go out and you catch a bunch of bass on the Yellowstone River, which we all know there's a lot of bass on the Yellowstone River, smallmouths. You catch a bunch of them every time you go out, and the numbers are high. Then you can make the limits more liberal, and they can, people can keep more of those fish.
So majority of the data was like trend data for populations then.
It was trend data. It was data that was kept year after year after year, and we did the sampling the same way year after year after year, and didn't try to make variations of any kind that would skew the numbers, that would tell us, what the populations of a particular species was.
So I'm kind of curious about the gill nets. You said like you had floating and sinking, and floating were like the first 6 feet of water, and then you had sinking ones that would get on the bottom. So if your lake, let's say, was 60 feet deep, are you guys ever sampling 60 feet deep with those sinking gill nets? And then what about like 45 feet deep? Like, how do you get the middle? Because 6 feet, on I'm just making it up, a 60-foot deep reservoir, 6 feet, it's just the top, and then you get the bottom. But what about all the middle swimmers?
Sure,
That
sure.
are at 40 feet.
The middle swimmers.
Sure,
I like that.
I don't know.
That's a great question, and there is a way to do that, and they're called vertical gill nets. We didn't use them. I've used them with BOR, Bureau of Reclamation, and we've gone out with them when they did a study on Bighorn Lake, Bighorn National Recreation Area, and they use some vertical gill nets. So that comes off of a reel on the front of your boat or the back of your boat, and it goes down, and it might be, like 6 foot, 7 foot wide, depending on what standard net that they used. And then they were, hundreds of feet.
Mm-hmm.
So they could sample
So
up.
you drop just like the 6 foot wide, 7 foot wide sheet down.
Yep. And then,
scooped.
and then, you would, depending on how long the net was, if it was a 200-foot net, you could go and sample into 200 feet of water. And then you could sample the top,
That whole water column.
the middle, the whole water column from the top down.
Do you ever pull up anything interesting in those nets? Like somebody's hand or a gold watch or,
I wish I found lots of gold.
Yeah.
Jeez. No, not really. I mean, metal car parts, mostly like on the river, on the Yellowstone River, because there's a lot of cars that were used for bank stabilization.
Yeah.
But as far as the reservoirs and stuff like that, not really.
What about interesting animals? Do you ever pull up something or kind of rare fish or weird fish? Do you ever pull something up and you're like, I'm not touching it. You can touch it.
That was always something that made the job interesting. You never knew what you're going to get the next day that you went out.
Yeah.
It could be a totally different day than, that you've experienced in the past. So that was part of the job that was pretty cool. I don't remember bringing in anything that was really weird. The one thing that we did find on
No telling.
Earl River was a skull, a human skull. And
What was that?
Yeah.
Dude, 2 minutes ago when I said you ever find a body.
well, we were talking netting.
Okay.
So you said with nets, and
Okay.
we were actual electrofishing, and there were some guys with us. They were volunteers, and we were shocking our normal section
No tell 'em.
near up near
Nowhere. Mm-hmm.
and nobody knows where
Nowhere.
it is out there. You'd be like,
No
yeah,
way.
Montana, I'm looking that up. Where the heck is
No.
that Montana? So we were sampling, and I was actually not helping out at the time. I was just following along and doing whatever I could to like take pictures and video and stuff like that of what we do, and use it for conferences and talks that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just noticed something on the bank, and it looked like a small ball. And I went over there, and here it is, a skull. And I'm just like, whoa, whoa. And I'm yelling at the guys. They're running the boat and doing the netting and stuff. And shut it down. and I told them, I said, hey, there's a skull here. And, it was in the newspaper and then in the news. So if you look back on, in the Billings Gazette, or if you look at Q2, I think that you could probably find it. But, yeah, it was they found out that it was a Native American, probably a small child or a woman, because of the size of the skull. And, they dated it back. I don't know what lab it went to, but we turned it over to the county sheriff that was in the area. We pulled over actually a warden, and then he called the sheriff, and then the next day they had people out there. We had the place marked and the spot marked, and they had people out there looking for other remnants of this body. And it was right after, I think it was right after a flood event, maybe like 2011, 2012, when we went back that next year. I think it got, just
turned up
in
in
the river. And
that's pretty cool. Do you know how old the skull was? Do you remember what they said?
I don't, but you got to remember that, it was probably over 100 years old, easily, just because, it looked, like tarnished. It had the patina of, something that was really old, kind of golden color. And, and when was the last time that there was, a Native American tribe in that area?
Yeah.
Up near,
No tell 'em.
up near,
None.
That's so cool.
It was very cool. And it was,
Did you touch it? Did you pick it up?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. And you know what?
Explain in detail what that was like walking up on it. It's a ball, and then you pick it up, and you're like looking at a individual there.
Yeah, I didn't take it in my hands and keep
Oh, you
holding it
didn't
and
have
examine it or whatever.
the Indiana Jones moment. No.
No, I just picked it up and looked all the way around it and stuff, and then I set it back down, and the other guys looked at it, and and then it was near the end of our sampling stretch too, so it worked out that best thing to do was probably just take it, mark the spot, and then turn it into the authorities. And they actually did find out that it was from a past tribe that was up in that area, and then they gave it to the tribe, and the tribe did a burial for it and everything that they do. So
cool.
It was really neat. And if you're really interested in finding out more about that one, it's in the news, so you just have to look back. I think it was 2012.
That's cool. So
people love finding buffalo skulls on the river when it washes out, and
yeah, we find some of those.
Super cool.
Yeah,
that is super. What? Okay, so you gill net. I'm switching gears here. You gill net, and your kill rate's pretty high on the gill nets, right?
Yep.
The lethality rate, is that the professional way to say it? What do you do with all the fish that you guys gill net that don't go back in the lake?
So anybody that helped us that day, when we were out sampling, we'd give them, a limit of fish that they could, legally keep on their possession, and we give them those fish. And then other fish people used, sometimes they use them for their gardens for like fertilizer. If they had compost piles, we bring them back and we, just utilize them that way. Or we do, like aging on the fish. We'd take out otolith bones and look at the otolith bones to see if for particular species that we were interested in, look at the bones. And then other stuff that we did was helped out the zoo when, when they were feeding bears or otters or anything like that. We give the zoo the dead fish. They were utilized. They weren't just,
Tossed.
Yeah. And then we used some of those fish too if we were doing sampling on that body of water. If we were doing something kind of hoop netting or something like that, we'd use those fish as bait
Mm-hmm.
in the bait bags for sampling catfish or ling or whatever.
Interesting. So through all of this sampling, what kind of data are you collecting on them? I know like the species, but are you also getting size, weight?
Yeah, so it just depending on what you were looking for, but the basic stuff was what species was it, and then if it was a male or female, sometimes you could tell if it was male or female, and then the size and the weight, and that was the major stuff that you looked at, and then if we weren't gill netting and we were marking fish, we usually used a Floy tag. It's made by Floy, so we call them Floy tags, but they're basically a spaghetti style T tag that went into a fish and had a number on it along with our identification R5 FWP, and then so we'd look at movement and then growth rates. With that tag, if people would catch them in the future, or we would catch them again in the future. Some of the other fish that we tagged were with pit tags. Pit tags is a magnetic tag, and each pit tag has a number that's encoded in that magnetic tag. So if we caught a 19-inch rainbow on the Yellowstone River at this point, and it got tagged with that, we have that in our data. And then somebody caught it 5 miles from then in 4 years, and it was 28 inches and a different poundage. We knew how much the growth was for that fish, and then how far it moved. So movement was a big thing, and then also we look at we would look at how healthy the fish were. So we do some things sometimes with our pollution guys, and they would take samples of the fish, health analysis of the fish. They take organs of the liver and kidney and different parts of the fish to look at how healthy the inside of the fish was. When we were catching fish that was mainly with electrofishing, you wouldn't know how old the fish was because you couldn't lethally kill it, and the only thing you could do was take a scale from it. If it was like had a scale on it. So you could take the scale and look at rings like a tree, and you could see how old it was. So there's a lot of different stuff that we did with fish when we sampled them and when we took the data down on the sheets. But most of it was going back to how many fish that we were catching of that species, and then that directly relates to how FWP would set regulations based on how many of that species was available and how the population was in that body of water, and then so they'd set their regs and their numbers by what we caught.
So as a man who's handled many fish, do you still like fish?
Yeah, I like to eat them.
Do you have a favorite fish?
Walleye.
Walleye? Well, to eat, you can't really go wrong.
To eat walleye. My favorite fish is ling, is the cod, freshwater cod.
Why is that?
Burbot, lawyer. It's got all sorts of names. They're just a cool fish. They're totally different than warm water fish. They're more active in the wintertime. So when other fish are kind of dormant and not as active, they're going crazy. They're spawning under the ice, and they're spawning like January, February, maybe early March, depending on where they're at geographically and the water temperatures, and each fish has a different marking. Like if you catch a smallmouth bass, you pretty much see the same smallmouth bass caught.
Mm-hmm.
If you got a doubler that's like the same as yours.
Yeah.
With ling, they're totally different markings on every fish. So it's
really
very, very cool. They kind of look like leopard fish.
Have you ever eaten ling?
Yeah, it's called poor man's lobster. So
I've heard that actually. Now that you say that,
yeah, and they're a great fish to eat. The one thing about ling that a lot of people don't know is they're really only good fresh. So if you go out and you catch your limit in ling, and you're going to put some in the freezer for another day, it won't taste the same, and it won't have the same texture as it did
Really?
catching them fresh and eating them fresh. So that's why companies and restaurants have never really marketed that on their menus. How many times have you gone out and seen cod on a? It just doesn't.
Mhm.
They don't have it. I mean, it's very, very uncommon.
Hmm.
And so, to store that fish, freeze it, and bring it out of being frozen, and then have it being palatable and very tasty is very hard to do. It's almost impossible just because of the way the fish is. And here's another fact that when ling are frozen, there's a chemical reaction by freezing the fish, and it causes formaldehyde to be produced in the fish. So who wants to eat formaldehyde, right?
Really?
So interesting.
So that was one way of me, when I talk to anglers, getting a point across that, hey, these fish, we don't know a lot about them. The population, is good in some places and not so good in other places. They're not a species of special concern or anything like that. They're not like endangered, but we didn't do a lot of sampling up until, I'd say, probably we started a study in 2004, I think, is when we started a study at FWP on 3 different species: burbot, catfish, and sauger. And that was really the first time on the Yellowstone River in our section, the mid Yellowstone River, from Highway 212 bridge at Laurel down to the Bighorn, where it dumps in the confluence of the Bighorn. That was the first time that we did any kind of studying on ling. And then I kept that study going as trend data mostly, not so, and to look at populations mostly, to see how populated they were in the river. And so I did that for up until I left in 22, and I know that the crew after me continued that. It just wasn't as intense as when we did it for a lot of years, because there's variables too. There's, when you do this, the ice is just coming off, the flow of the rivers is low, and so you got
Yeah.
these 18-foot jet boats with all this weight in them, with all this gear that you're using for sampling these things
In a low river.
and easy to hit bottom, just hard to get up on plane, and you got to be a good boat driver. And so that was challenging, and it's just some years we could only do certain sections of the river, or certain a certain number of days, because they're only active at a certain part of the year. So if the ice comes off, let's say March 1st is your first day, or right around March 1st is your first day, we did 5 weeks of sampling straight, and went out 2 days, set nets, and then went back Monday and Tuesday. We'd set nets. Wednesday was the lag day, was to do any, like get stuff done in the office, any stuff that we needed to get for supplies, fix boats, fix nets, fix whatever, get ready for sampling and pulling the nets on Thursday and Friday. And then we did 4 days a week. And then it was basically 5 weeks long, because we did about 100 miles of river.
Oh, dang.
So, but that's my favorite fish. They're just really cool. They're totally different than any other species out there.
Have you ever caught them without nets? Like traditional angling, I guess? you would say?
Yes.
Yeah. How do you specifically target ling? I've never targeted them before.
Well, remember, you only want to eat them fresh.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to, they taste good and they're great fish. But the best way that I've found to fish for ling has been, like cut bait, chunk bait, minnows, something like that.
Oh, really?
You know, yeah, worms, they don't really seem to work. Leeches. Um,
So what's your recipe for ling? Do you have some special ling recipe?
well, poaching is, as far as cooking it,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, you can look it up, but poaching it is, you know, simmering it in water is the best way to cook it. Or
Okay.
best way
Just,
to,
just like
Mhm.
lobster.
yeah,
Yeah.
just like lobster, but you don't want to boil it. You don't really want to boil anything you cook.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people know much about, you know, cooking or anything like that, but anything you make sausages or, you know, vegetables or anything like that, you really don't want to boil anything that you cook.
Simmer.
That you simmer
Huh.
keeps the flavor in, tastes better, has better texture.
Good to
That,
know.
that comes from my growing up. My dad was a chef. He owned his own catering company
Oh.
in Milwaukee. So I learned a lot about cooking when I was
Yeah.
young and growing up.
So do you have a least favorite fish where
That
you
was
catch
mine.
it and you're
Hey,
like,
I gotta ask some
Oh,
questions
sorry.
too here.
I just
Do you have a least favorite fish
go ahead, Jared.
that you've been catching? Or here's my question that I've been thinking about for 46 minutes now. What fish are you sick of? Is it carp? I mean, here's how I imagine this gill netting and this electrofishing is there's like some cool fish and then there's a lot of like goldeneye. And there's a lot of, you know what I mean? There's got to be, you're just like, Jesus, this is the 600th one of these we've counted. You know?
Yeah, that happens, and you know, just you got to be good at netting. You found that out.
Yeah.
I mean, we would when we were out electrofishing on the
Nowhere.
river, you would see a lot of undesirables. I guess I would call them.
There's a term for it.
Fish that weren't target fish. So
Okay.
you know, to get those fish, sometimes you had to get around those other ones, so they were kind of a pain in the ass. But a least favorite fish for me would be the one that would hurt you the most, and that was a stone cat. And the stone cat would cause just pain.
So what's a stone cat?
It's a ictalurd. It's a small catfish.
Really?
Yeah, and they're native in our waters here in Montana and in the Yellowstone.
Stone cat.
Yeah, they're just little. They're just little, maybe like 10 inches long would be a really big one.
Are they like bullheads, kind of? Are they not yellow?
They're in that family.
They're in that family.
They're in that family.
Stone cat.
Yeah,
huh?
they're stone cat. And stone cats have a rounded or a squared off tail, where other catfish, you know, like channel catfish, bullheads, they have a forked tail like that.
Mhm.
Right. So,
Okay.
so they have a squared off or a rounded tail, and they only grow to be like maybe 10 inches, and they're, you know, like quarter of a pound.
Hmm.
You know, 0.3 of a pound or something like that. But they have toxins in their
Spines.
in their
or whatever?
spines, and when they get you, boy, they hurt.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, they're just
Stone cats. That I didn't know they existed. I kind of want to go catch one.
Poke it. See how much it hurts.
you got to use a real small hook and a worm.
Yeah.
And you'll catch stone cat anywhere along the bank in the rocks or whatever. They're very
Prolific.
they're
Huh?
very prolific all over the place.
Dang.
So yeah, but they hurt. So
Are
that-
they game fish?
That'd be my least favorite fish. Anything that causes me pain.
That sounds like a pretty logical reason to hate a fish.
Is there any fish that before you started, you know, your career in this that you liked, and then after you got done, you kind of like didn't like them as much? Like I worked in a deli, and a lot of people that worked in the deli with me, after a while, they're like, I can't eat fried chicken. I cook it every day. I can't eat it. Me personally, still love fried chicken. Didn't affect me. But, you know, is there something that burned you out on it, or any kind of fish you're just like, ugh?
Yeah, I mean, probably smallmouth bass.
Yeah?
Yeah. They were introduced into the Bighorn River, and they made their way into the Yellowstone River, and I think that was in the 90s, and they just took off, and the population just, outcompeted a bunch of other fish. So you got this non-native fish that was introduced, and they really didn't know that they were going to take off that much. They thought, put them in the Bighorn River, they'll like the Bighorn River, they'll probably stay there, right? That didn't happen. They like the Yellowstone way better. Is the structure that they like, the flows, the makeup of the chemistry of the water, the bait, everything that's there is everything that they need is there. So, but bass were just, first off, I don't really care for fish that is kind of fishy tasting, and bass is kind of fishy tasting.
Yeah.
Depending on how you do it. I mean, if you put enough beer batter on it,
Yeah.
probably tastes all right, right?
Yeah.
So a bass was probably smallmouth bass on the Yellowstone River, probably the biggest pain in the ass as far as.
Here's another one. Here's another one.
Yeah. You just get hundreds of them. And
You're gonna make a bass fisherman cry by that statement.
if anybody's out there and you're from, around Billings and you fish the Yellowstone River, don't worry about the bass population. It's doing just fine, and it's going to do just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know the limits went up when I was when I was working for them, and management, bumped up the limits, and they had a little pushback from the bass guys. If anything, reducing a population by angling is really tough to do. Mother Nature takes care of populations way better than humans do.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard for us to put a dent in a population, except for
With,
like wolves.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go out and you poison wolves, you're gonna
Right.
decimate them, and they're gonna become extinct.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they did in the 30s. But fisheries, especially the bass fishery on the Yellowstone River, this is a great time to go out. River's clear, river's warm, fish are active, they're fun to catch. They just, to me, they're not great tasting fish, but they're fun to catch. They jump out of the water. For kids, you want to get somebody hooked on fishing, go bass fishing on the Yellowstone River.
Definitely fight. So, in all your ventures, right, you've been on a ton of different waters. I suppose that you have some spots. Did it kind of ruin fishing for you? Because like when I go out
you
fishing,
kind of
it's-
you're out there
You're
knowing where the
cheating.
fishing holes are, and then you're like, hey, this week I was working. This weekend I'm taking my buddies to we electrofish some huge trout over here.
Nah. Maybe at first I might have used my job as something like that. Like I loved mountain lake fishing. Just something that really captivated me. Going up in the mountains, being in wilderness area. You're on your own. You got things that can eat you out there. It was a challenge, a huge challenge. So that was probably, the one place that I took advantage of the most, but I did it before I worked for Fish, Wildlife and Parks. I knew about it when I first moved out here and I started working for him. I met a guy that was working with him on the Mountain Lakes program. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to go up in the mountains and sample the mountain lakes. And I got to do it for like 6 years before an opening came up, above my position. And I just, it was the right thing to do. It was progression, and I wanted to do it. But when I worked for them and I did the High Mountain Lakes program, it was so much fun. I mean, you would see so much beautiful country up there, and there's 325 lakes that we had fish in and managed in the Beartooth and Crazy Mountains, and there were probably like 900 plus lakes up there, but only about a third of them were fish, had fish in them. So over about a 10-year period, all those lakes were sampled, and so you could go, if you worked for FWP in 10 years, you could probably go to close to 325 lakes that we had managed.
Gives you that opportunity to be up there and kind of explore around and stuff.
Yeah, and so and that, there's the lakes up there, the ones that had good food in them for fish all year long and didn't just rely on the summer months, and they did the best. The fish were the healthiest, they were the biggest, and those were the ones that that we wanted to go to. Was just like anybody else. You want to go out and you want to shoot a 400 class bull, don't you? Bull elk.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, well, you want to go up and you want to catch a state record golden trout.
Yeah.
My brother ended up doing it. My brother Carl ended up catching the golden trout state record. It got broken in 2002, but he had it for a few years, and that lake that we went to was just gorgeous, and it drew you back. You wanted to go back there.
Like a storybook.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there were places like that I visited, that not just because of the fishing that I wanted to go back, it was just being in that, that spot, and just, it was just beautiful. So there were a lot of places up there like that. And the good thing about us is we went during the week, so we didn't see a lot of people.
Oh,
We didn't get the weekend warriors, which was great.
us too. No.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, exactly. And some drainages, like the Boulder drainage, they have the church camps on them and stuff like that. You'd see more people in those areas. But typically, the farther back that you got into the wilderness area, the less people that you saw, and the better the fishing too. So, and the lakes. Most of the lakes are stock lakes, but there are lakes that reproduce up there. They're self-sustaining. They have the right substrates. They have the right temperatures. They have the right flow. They have everything that they need to reproduce in the lakes. And they do have, there are some lakes that do that. Other lakes are stocked, and the stocking program that was used from the state of Montana was about every 10 years that they'd go ahead and stock the lake.
And how do they accomplish that? They have like a backpack with an aquarium on the back?
Oh yeah. No. So way back in the day they had that. Way back in the day they used mules and horseback, and they'd take like, the big 5-gallon coolers or big coolers in on horseback or by mule, and they'd go ahead and plant fish and move fish around, and mining was a big thing too. When mining was a big thing near Cook City, to have food for the miners back there and not have to transport it from somewhere else, they'd have fish available for them. So they'd move fish from one lake to another lake to another lake, and that way that's how stocking one does, and we call it bucket biology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how bucket biology came around. Was mainly, in the mining days back in the early 1900s, and then, but the way they do it in most states is by helicopter. So they grow the fish, and then they in the hatchery, and then they stock them usually. Excuse me. They stock them accordingly by how many acres of the lake was, and 100 fish per acre was the normal stocking rate. That can be varied. If you want to, if you have a hard time, or if you want to have a fishery that's more of a trophy fishery or something like that, you might want to go down in numbers. So we would say, okay, we're going to drop that from 100 fish per acre to 50 fish per acre. And those were the really hard lakes to get to. So to reward those people that were hardcore hikers and, basically willing to die.
So you drop them from a helicopter bucket, like a wildfire type of thing?
They'd hover above the lake. And I don't know how many feet, but I want to say, like maybe like 8-10 feet or something like that above the lake. And then they'd have a toggle switch. and they'd hit the toggle switch, and the fish would dump out of the tanks that they had on the side of the helicopters. I went a few times on it. It was pretty cool. I've been in the helicopter for different fishery stuff, but it was a neat way of doing it, and definitely the survival rate of the fish was higher because you could fly them in, and it didn't take very long from wherever your landing zone was or your loading zone, and to get to the lake. You know, it might only be, you know, some of the short ones are just a few minutes, and some of them were like a half an hour. So survival rates are pretty high. And then they would, again, then we'd go up and sample those lakes and see how those fish were doing, and we'd wait, you know, 4 or 5 years before we'd go to see what the success rate was and how they were growing. And as the years went on, the most important fish were sampled more than the least important fish. So the least important fish were the non-natives, which rainbow trout or brook trout, eastern brook trout. So they were sampling, and really didn't have brown trout in the mountain lakes. We had lake trout in a couple of the lakes. I know
No tell.
had lake trout in it. I think there was only one lake that had brown trout in it. It wasn't really in high mountain lakes, and it was in the mountains, but it wasn't wilderness area. So
What about golden trout? You
golden
mentioned that.
trout,
You
yeah,
guys were
golden
stocking
trout. Golden trout were introduced from California. They were brought in from California. What happened was, this is a story that I read, that a train hauling golden trout from California to the east, and I'm guessing Appalachian Mountains, that they were going to haul them back east and plant the fish in the mountain lakes in the Appalachians, broke down in somewhere in Wyoming near the Wind River drainage. And so some of those fish went into the Wind River, and there's several lakes in the Wind River drainage. And then some of the fish went into the Beartooths. So that's how they got into Montana. And you know, some of the lakes did really well with the golden trout, and some lakes didn't. And you know, now we have the fisheries department has been using
Nowhere.
Open Lake up near
None yet.
as their lake to go and get the stock from, get the eggs, and then they grow those fish in the hatchery and stock those fish into lakes that already have rainbow trout or golden trout in them, to put them on a stocking program every 8 to 10 years. So that's
So you mentioned non-natives and natives. What is native like in the Beartooth area? Is it just cutthroat? Is that the native?
yeah, Yellowstone cutthroat trout are the native cutthroat trout in the Beartooths.
So-
and that's the one fish that they're trying to protect that species as much as possible. You know, in those wilderness areas or in those mountain areas. They're high mountain fish. They like cold water. They like high oxygen water. They're not real aggressive fish, not like brook trout or brown trout. Still, I mean, aggressive, but not like those other species. So
What do you think about? And I've heard this a few times on different things. Is them killing a river or killing a stream and putting a native species back in. You know, how long have rainbow, browns, brooks, you know, all these different fish been in these rivers and streams to then go and get rid of them all? And, you know, really they're putting back cutthroat trout, right? Is that?
yeah, that's one of the species that they're trying to preserve, and trying to preserve the genetic.
So
You know-
what's your stance on that, or what do you think about that? Because you've netted a lot of fish, and you've stocked a lot of non-native fish. So what, you
Well,
know,
Okay.
what do you think about that?
Yeah. You know, I think that one thing you got to look at is management of fisheries. Who do you want managing your fisheries? Do you want state government and state entities and the public having input on the fisheries in the state, or do you want your federal government managing your fisheries in the state?
Well, personally, I would like the public to have a say, probably not the federal government.
So part of that is the public is involved in what's done, and they do go through a process to have the public involved in it and voice their opinion. But I think that most of the time, the species and managing the species and who's managing the species makes a decision on what's going to be done. And you don't want the species to go extinct, or be managed by federal government or a different government or a different entity than who's really the best people to have manage it. So yeah, we've done some projects where we've gone ahead and removed all the fish that were in a stream, and then put back the native trout that were in there, and we tried to get the genetic fish that were in that area. So tributaries of that stream or that particular stream, they tried to take, I'd say I'm not work for them anymore, but they would take the fish from that area and use the purest fish that they could find in that area and reproduce that fish in a hatchery, and then stock that fish back in when it was safe to do so. So, worked on many projects like that. It was very cool and very, it was gratifying to actually see something that was done, that was an objective. The last thing, the few things that I didn't like, or one thing I didn't like about the work that I did with them, was you don't always see an end product. I like to see, like when I go build something out of wood, I like to see an end product. Or I build something out of metal, like I see an end product, and be proud of what I built or what I did. In fisheries, you didn't always see that. You were just going out and doing the same work year after year after year, and you were just looking at trend data, and you were looking at, okay, this fish is doing good, this fish isn't doing good, this fish is doing good, we're going to base regulations on that, blah, blah, blah. So you didn't really see an end product, but it was so much fun doing that work, out in the field, doing that type of work, that I kind of could get past that, but with the projects, the special projects that had to do with a stream that we did, a restoration to, where we restored habitat or did some habitat work to it. It's just like anything else. If you have habitat for that creature or that animal, they're going to survive. Fishery is the same way. If you have the habitat that they need or want, they're going to survive. Habitat is the almighty thing that's driving populations of any type of species. So, I know that that's a problem with sage grouse in our state. I know that it's been that way for a long time, decreasing sagebrush, big flats of sagebrush out there, and that's what those birds need, and it's being turned into to grazing lands, and so the populations of that species, because what's available for them is getting ruined, is causing the population to crash. So same way with fisheries.
So you've mentioned a few times, they're basing their regulations off, making kind of policy off what you do. Did you guys ever come out with your numbers and it said this, and then when the regulations came out, they said this, and you're like, are you reading the fishing regs? And they're like, hey, you can only keep one smallmouth bass in the lower Yellowstone, and you're like, what?
Well, that wasn't the case, but it was the case. It was the case for another species, for sauger.
Sauger?
Yeah. Yeah. So saugers is in the walleye family.
I caught my first one
They're-
on my
they're-
bachelor
Party trip. yeah.
party trip on
Yeah.
Missouri.
They're very cool fish. They're also called a sandpike. I caught my first one. Can't remember exactly the body water, but I want to say Lake Winnebago.
Mhm.
It's a big lake, like 30 miles long and 12 miles wide in Wisconsin, and they're called sandpike back there. Not even called sauger. They hang out on the sandy bottom, and they hang out right on the bottom, and they're just opportunist feeders. Then they have something swim by them. They're like bam, like lightning. So they can go from sitting still. They're kind of like a cheetah,
Mhm.
sitting still, and boom, dead.
And they got those big old sharp teeth.
They
in
got
them,
some
you know?
sharp teeth. Yeah, I got plenty of pictures on my phone. If you guys ever wanting to put pictures up or video or anything like that, I got. As long as I don't get in trouble, I can give you some of that. But yeah, I think that that there's definitely those species out there that need protection, and other species that don't, and that's their job to go out and do that.
Mhm.
To tell us. But on the other hand, too, yeah, it's frustrating working together with management to go out there and do the work, and feel like sometimes the work that you didn't make a difference on what was done as far as regulations. Yeah, it's definitely a frustrating part of that job, and other people I'm sure have the same experience in their jobs.
So you mentioned sauger. You think it should be more restrictive? Do you think sauger are far and few between now? What did you mean by that when you brought up sauger?
When I brought up sauger, you brought up bass.
Oh, yeah.
You could only caught one. You could only keep one bass. Well, it's just the opposite. You can keep a lot of bass because the
Yeah.
population's
So
so
big.
prolific. And then the sauger, when we started sampling for sauger, and I can't remember the exact date that we started sampling sauger, but it was the early 2000s, like 2003, 2004. We really targeted those fish because they were part of a telemetry study.
Mm-hmm.
And in our area, so our area, the area that I sampled in was basically from Highway 212 bridge by Laurel all the way down to the mouth of the Bighorn.
Mhm.
That was Region 5. Region 5 went above that, but sauger really didn't hang out in that area above, say, the Clarks Fork River. And that's just down from Highway 212.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like what, couple miles maybe
Yep.
down
Yep.
from the bridge. So we started sampling, in that area, and then we really targeted from Huntley Diversion Dam, which is just upstream, just right around Huntley,
Mhm.
about 8 miles down from East Bridge in Billings. And we sampled sauger from that point down to the Bighorn River, and which was our area of, the target area that we
Mhm.
found them in. And basically the population decreased after you got to the Huntley Diversion Dam, and a lot of it had to do with fish passage. And there's been work done on that fish passage, and maybe some other time we can talk about that. But fish passage is a big thing all over the country. If you have fish passage or fish ladders, some kind of structure for fish to go around a barrier, you're going to have connectivity all the way through until they get to an area where they're not basically the type of water and the type of structure and is not what they're looking for.
Their forte.
Yeah.
I deal with a lot of that for work because I do concrete products and stuff, and all of our boxes now are, meant to keep the turbulence low or not low, but put like riprap in them and make it so the fish can get through. Like any of our water crossings now are fish friendly, if you will.
Yeah. And that's what has been, you know, looked at, something that's looked at when any type of, you know, like bridge or a crossing or anything is done by man. They look at, you know, how is this going to impact, you know, this species,
Yep.
or how is this going to impact this animal or anything like that. So, yeah, culverts, how they're laid in, you know, what kind of grade it's at, all sorts of different things come into play when you're doing construction or
Yeah, and trying to make it fish friendly.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So
So, of all the like special projects that you've done, do you have one that stands out that I know you also work with like Yellowstone research, doing some turtle stuff? Is there one project that like sticks out that you're like that was my favorite project?
that's a tough one because
You can take a moment and think.
because there's actually a lot of projects that I worked on that were really cool projects. You know, I think that the one that really was probably the coolest and probably the best for the species was probably
No tell 'em.
in the
Nice try.
cool place to be. I guarantee you 99.9% of the population will never go there. It's a really hard place to find. It's a really hard place to get into. But if you have the right connections, we can get you there. And what we did was we had a contracted company build a dam on this creek and extend the river with that trout in it by I think it was around 6 miles or something like that. 8 total miles, because they really were hanging out in the first 2 miles of the river, and then you didn't really see much of them after that. And the brown trout, which were a competitive fish that were also in that creek, were coming upstream and then out competing that fish for the habitat.
What was the fish?
It was cutthroat.
Cutthroat.
Yeah, it was actually, we did a lot of research on it and couldn't really find a specific date that fish was put into that stream. So we think it was an indigenous population of fish. So they've been there forever.
For as long as we know.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, I mean, that was cool to be able to increase an area that these fish could, you know, just basically have a home for. You know, their home was increased in distance, and by this barrier, you keep the non-native brown trout out. So what we did was we went in there and we were doing backpack shocking, and this place is hell. I mean, to get into. I mean, it's 800-foot canyon drop down to the bottom. And so
I wouldn't like that.
but there's a way to get in there
Yeah.
at one point and another place at the top. And so you got, you know, this 8 miles of stream to fish for these fish. And so we went in and we found this spot where there were 2 rock walls, and, you know, this company got hired on to build this trolley system with cables and be able to lower down an excavator and do excavating and do all the concrete work and have it so that fish couldn't get to that point and jump over the barrier. So I think it was a 6-foot barrier. If the apron on it after the actual wall was probably about 10 feet. And then the stream started after that, but it was all concrete, and it was all done with a mixer down at the bottom, you know, a portable mixer.
Mm-hmm.
It was incredible, the work that was done there, and the man hours and everything that was put into that thing that makes it, you know, the one special place
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
really sticks out in my head as far as what project was the coolest. And we had 3 different agencies included in that because the Fish Wildlife Parks manage fisheries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we also had BLM land, that Bureau of Land Management land,
Mhm.
that was down there, and Forest Service land. So we had Forest Service, BLM, and
You had the trifecta.
yeah, it was
Army Corps would have been the cherry on top, huh?
they might have ruined everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. For all those people out there that work for the Army Corps, they do good things. But I think that that was challenging too. To work with the public and to work with a company that was private, and those different agencies they all had to be on board and all have the same objective, and it was impressive. We had to do it that way because we couldn't get rid of the species, the brown trout, by electrofishing. We'd always find the next year we always find a little brown trout that you miss 2 fish.
Mm-hmm.
You miss a male and a female and they reproduce, and all of a sudden you got these little fingerlings that you find the next year, and they're brown trout. You just look at them and you're like, oh guys, again. So basically, we came up with a plan to rote known that stream, and then and get it back to where there's all native fish in there. So we basically kept those fish separated from where the treatment area was from, and then kept them netted into the uppermost part of this stream where there weren't any brown trout, and then did a treatment from that point down, and then got rid of all the fish that way.
And those fish, is that like some kind of thing you put in that paralyzes them, or is it like a toxin, like you don't want to eat those fish, you guys bury them in a hole? What is that?
Yeah,
when
so
you kill a stream.
Yeah, so rotenone is a poison. It basically cuts off the oxygen to the fish, and so it's a lethal way of getting rid of them. And then basically we neutralize that with another chemical at below the barrier, and try to not kill all the fish
The
that
whole-
are
the whole stream, yeah.
below that. So it's something that that we got good at, and they have a certain group of people that know a lot about it and have done it a bunch of times, and they're getting better and better and better at it. And so it's a science. They look at water flow and how much product to put in, and how fast the water flows, and how fast it breaks down. That was something that we had to have, like a jug here, and then a certain distance down you have another jug, and for coverage and for lethal purposes. So it was a cool project, and we did some other projects like that, and that species is still there, and hopefully is going to be there for
My kids, my
Yeah,
grandkids,
yeah,
my
exa-
great grandkids.
exactly. Yeah. So they'll be able to enjoy the things
Really
that
cool.
we got to enjoy.
It's
Really cool.
own special little population up in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, you guys have to definitely go there someday. There's teepee rings over there.
I might have to. That's right up my alley.
It's a very cool place to go to. I've already sent some people there, and they're just like, "We love you, man."
Yeah, good.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Earl, and talking with us. I've learned a lot just in our conversations. You just kind of not being part of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. You just have like the public perception of it, and kind of what they do. You just kind of read the little articles, and so it was nice to sit down with you, who knows the business, and kind of get the insight of how it works. And your perspective. I think that's pretty valuable.
And I'd love to have you on, down the road to talk about other things too, because you've got quite a few adventures under your belt, and I'm intrigued. All this different stuff you've done.
Yeah, I've done a lot of stuff in the outdoors, not just with my job, but on the side, recreating just like you guys have, or all these people that are doing it on the weekends or doing it whenever they can do it. And so I'd love to talk some more about adventures that I've been on and taken people on, and it's definitely something that I'd be interested in doing.
Awesome. Well,
good.
That'll probably wrap up episode 6.
Yep.
Check us out on Instagram, TikTok,
YouTube,
Facebook. No.
OnlyFans? Maybe not.
I don't think we have OnlyFans or Facebook yet.
We do not.
I do have an OnlyFans, but it's for my feet.
Yeah.
It's not associated with this.
Oh. Gross.
All right. Well,
until next time,
we will be surviving the week to live on the weekends.